Our next speaker came to Signal more than 10 years ago. We invited this great analyst to give us an update on the retail landscape. And as a matter of fact, we have that site, Signal360, pgsignal.com. We will put that up there for you. So you can take a look at what 10 years ago looked like, and you can compare it with what you're about to hear from Sucharita Kodali, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester in Retail. Welcome to Sucharita. Welcome back.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is wonderful to be back, and I am honored, flattered. Usually when journalists call me, it's usually about like, well, why is this technology not going to work? So I hope you guys don't throw tomatoes at me, because what I'm actually going to talk about is today's retail reality, but I'm going to frame it in the form of 10 truth bombs. And I divided those into 3 big buckets. We have digital commerce, tech and sustainability, and the economy. So we'll start first with digital commerce. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's what I've been studying at Forrester for the last 20 years. And I did a survey last year with brands, which I thought would be useful to share. So this is just a high-level level set that on average, CPGs generate about 23% of their sales from what we call digital. And of that digital, about half, or 47%, as you can see from the slide, comes from marketplaces. And marketplaces are, of course, it's the Amazons in the United States, it's Mercado Libre in Latin America, and so on. The issue, however, with marketplaces, and this is my first point, is that marketplaces are a double-edged sword. So you all know that there is all of the great value that comes from a revenue standpoint, it comes from a sales standpoint. But on the other hand, there are an equal number of brands that see the issues with marketplaces being that it is a rampant mess that is fueled by the gray market. Now, the issue with the gray market is that a lot of it actually is a result of some of the promotional activity of CPGs themselves. So this is data from Jungle Scout, and they do a survey with Amazon sellers every year. And as you can see here, and what they do is they actually ask the Amazon sellers what is their business model. You'll see here from this slide that about 1/5 of all of Amazon's sellers call themselves what's called retail arbitrageurs, which basically means these are people who go buy things on sale in physical stores with the intent to go sell them on online marketplaces later. And I would estimate that this is probably about 5 to 10% of all of the units that are actually sold in physical stores that you think are going to end consumers that actually end up on online marketplaces. This is the definition of gray market. And the challenge there is that marketplaces end up being sales accretive, but not necessarily brand accretive. And this is a huge, huge issue for brands, because if you don't get your houses in order, this is a massive liability. Now, what can you do about it, and what are some of the opportunities? We'll talk about that, but one of the big things is to continue to embrace DTC, which I know has had a lot of challenges, particularly in CPG. But from that same survey that we did with brands who do embrace DTC, they found 3 major benefits. First, of course, is all of that awesome first-party data. 84% of brands say that they are getting all sorts of insights from a market research standpoint and a new product launch capability. The second is profit, because when brands actually do DTC well, they actually do see higher margins. And third is, of course, all of that brand protection and the ability to insulate yourself from the gray market. Now, the issue is that so many CPGs have not managed to really nail the profitability piece, and a lot of it, there are a number of reasons for that. And they don't see necessarily the marketing benefits. And the reason for that is that they tend to not exploit one of the best parts of their entire value proposition, which is the packaging. So when you look at any given CPG, like this is one P&G example and another that is not, but most CPGs will they basically promote their URL in teeny tiny, itty bitty little font on the back of packages at the bottom, and they lead you to an e-commerce site that's not even optimized for commerce. So when you do that, it is highly unlikely that you're going to deliver very much from a DTC standpoint. So that's an important part of the challenge here. And to me, it reminds me, of the 1998 equivalent of a retail store not telling its shoppers in a physical store that they had a URL either, or a place that you could go do business. So I'm just saying that there is an opportunity. Maybe not this, as this is actually a text to buy, kind of number, which is bigger than the font size of the brand name, but there is an opportunity to do more than what is currently done. So number 3, there is no media that's more powerful than retail media, and here is my evidence. So at Forrester, every year what we do is we do a survey with consumers, and we ask them of about a dozen different media tactics. What do you pay attention to the most? What do you ignore? And every year, year after year, in the United States and Europe and a number of regions around the world, the most paid attention to tactic, in-store ads, the least ignored, the one that people ignore, they pay attention to and they least ignore is that in-store ad. And of course, that points to the value of trade promotions and the latent strength and the capability of retailer media networks. But what's interesting is that the place where most CPGs are leaning into the most, the social networks, the search engines, those tend to be less paid attention to and more ignored. So when we look at, well, where is the best ROI, it needs to be where, kind of you're looking at with retailer media networks. Now, there's a lot that still needs to be happening there. They need to improve ultimately their execution. And I would love to talk more about that, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. Feel free to reach out to me because there's a lot more to say on that. So the second big bucket, though, is tech and sustainability. And we talked about the marketplaces with the gray market. The single biggest opportunity that brands have with respect to really kind of better managing that gray market is to engage in a technology that already exists, which is the individual tracking of goods. And I know it's an expensive transition, but this is crucial. And I'm talking about way, way more than just putting lot numbers on packages. This is individual tracking down to boxes and bags and having serial numbers that are unit specific. And the reason for this is that without knowing exactly what goes where, to whom, and when, you are not going to know where the leakages in your supply chain are. And those leakages are what ultimately lead to that gray market. Number 5, every ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, and this is perhaps one of the hottest terms in business these days, every single one of these ESG initiatives, while often with the noblest of ambitions, are beyond what I'll call greenwashing. They are greenwishing, which is where companies really want to believe that what they're doing is environmentally sound, but what ultimately actually happens is very, very different. So a couple of examples. One is actually a P&G example with PureCycle, which is a fantastic technology in theory, because what it is it's about being able to recycle almost any type of plastic, because you probably have heard that most plastic doesn't get recycled. Now, the issue with PureCycle, though, is that it's a technology that's been around for like 7 years and doesn't yet have a live deployment anywhere. And in fact, to the contrary, actually has a bunch of short sellers who are skeptical about whether or not that it will ever meet the promise of what it's supposed to be. Another example on the right-hand side of the slide is a case study from a dips manufacturer in New Zealand that was looking to basically switch out all of their plastic containers to bamboo. The issue with bamboo is that even though it's compostable, it can only be composted in an industrial composting facility, which most municipalities do not have. And if you don't have it, it just ends up back in a landfill. So the carbon footprint is no different than what you would have had with plastic. Now, these are issues that the grocery industry really, really needs to grapple with because it's such a huge part of the carbon emissions problem. And ultimately, the outcome, the solution, part of it is going to have to come from business and enterprise, but a lot of it is going to have to come from government. It's going to have to come from laws. It's going to have to come from us as voters advocating for higher standards. And some of those standards are going to be things like industrial composting facilities or styrofoam recycling machines. Yes, you heard that right. Styrofoam can be recycled, but very, very few municipalities have the capability of doing it, and that's why most of it ends up in landfills. Number 6, without having these standards that are in place, these government regulations, a higher bar, what we end up with is that consumers just volunteering to consume less. And that's where you end up with ultimately a big, big problem for everybody in the retail industry, where if consumers just pull back entirely, that's kind of the heart of your business. And unless you have a plan for how you're going to manage things in the closed loop and the circular economy, unless you have a plan for how you are going to take advantage of the pie that's left, that is massively problematic. So number 7, this is one that could be heresy. So at Forrester, one of the things that we do, and we have tried, we really, really have tried to ask people, how can the metaverse help you? What are your problems? What do you know about it? Do you even see this being valuable anywhere? So we probably asked 100 executives at different companies, Fortune 500 companies, about how the metaverse could be impactful. And we literally asked this question: how important is it to your organization on a scale of 1 to 10? Really, the answer that summed it up best was this. And the reason for this really has to do with things that are deeper here, which is that these executives are people who are grappling with inflation, supply chain. These are people who are being asked to make statements on topics like abortion and gun control. They don't really have time to focus on things like the metaverse. And to them, the metaverse is at best in-game advertising now, but this vision of this immersive world is a decade, probably 2 away. So that brings me to the economy. And one of the things that I want to point out, because you've probably heard over and over again how imminent a recession is, what a catastrophe the economy is, consumers are spending more in retail now than ever before in history, and they are spending more than they certainly were in 2019. And all of that inflation that you're hearing about, the shopper is more than covering, and often covering with a smile on their face. And we know this because they're buying things like travel and other discretionary items like food away from home. So the question you may ask is, well, why then do half of people think that the state of the economy is actually poor? So the best answer for that is actually this data. It's from The Economist and YouGov, which does a survey almost every week. Fantastic data if you can kind of get your hands on it. And the single biggest demographic differences in the data there was associated with political affiliation. And when you look at who voted for whom in 2020, 3/4 of Trump voters say that the economy is poor. Meanwhile, 1/4 of Biden voters think the economy is poor. So as a business leader, what does that tell you? Well, to me, what that suggests is that we need to be really wary of information around data like consumer confidence, because much of that could really be just noise. And instead, what we really need to be looking at is data on actual spend, because that's probably more tied to the elasticity of demand. So just think about that. And it also suggests that if and when the recession does come, it will probably be more on the milder side. And you have to be thinking about, if you think that an economic apocalypse is imminent, maybe you could be overcorrecting, at least based on some of the data that we have here. Number 10, the human condition is going to improve when we educate people, not when we deliver. And I'm being frivolous here when I say like chicken, but it's like Cheetos and chocolate, getting delivered in like light speed is something that we really, really need to step back and think about what is going to help versus kind of what are things that are nice to haves. And when I step back and I look at where we have funded business, we have funded so many retail startups in the last several years, much of which does go to sectors like quick commerce or fast fashion. But when we look at sectors like education, they've been pretty underfunded. And of those startups that have received $36 billion, a lot of them have been Chinese startups. Now, we have a planet that is on fire. We have major, major issues. We need so many more people like Daniela Rios. But she and her future progeny, that's going to come more from the $36 billion on the education side, not from the startups that are funded through quick commerce. So what I would ask you to do is, as these startups approach you, is to have a high bar for them. To ask them, what is their purpose? What are they doing for society? Make sure that they themselves have answered, what is their mission that's going to improve the world? Are they even carbon neutral? Because if the answer is that no, it's not, or they don't have a path to it, you need to keep looking and trying to find those players that are in that, that are improving the human condition. So with that, I am just going to wrap up. I'm already at time anyway. This is the summary. If you guys want these slides, or if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is just first initial, last name at Forrester. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Sucharita. Thank you so much.